She used to close billion-dollar deals before breakfast. Now she can't close her own front door without asking for help. Ava Collins, 30 years old, former tech CEO, wheelchair-bound since the accident that rewrote her entire life, sits alone beside the most decorated Christmas tree in Manhattan while the whole city laughs around her. No board meetings, no headlines, just the cold and the lights and the unbearable sound of other people's happiness. She thinks nobody sees her anymore. She's wrong. If this story finds you tonight, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Hit like, and let's begin. The tree went up the first week of December. It always did. 60 feet of Norway spruce hauled in from somewhere upstate, rigged with 40,000 lights and enough tinsel to blind a person if the wind caught it right. The city workers spent 3 days on it. Traffic rerouted, cherry pickers, a small crowd of onlookers who had nothing better to do on a Tuesday afternoon than watch men in orange vests argue about extension cords. By Christmas Eve, Rockefeller Plaza glowed like something out of a dream. Or at least, that was how the tourists described it. The ones taking photos, elbowing each other for position, holding their phones up over their heads to catch the full height of the thing. Children in wool coats pressed their noses to the barriers. Couples stood close. A street musician near the south entrance played "Oh Holy Night" on a saxophone, badly, but the crowd clapped anyway because it was Christmas, and clapping felt like the right thing to do. Ava Collins had been sitting in the same spot for 47 minutes. She knew it was 47 minutes because she'd checked her phone at 6:13 when she first arrived, and now it was 7 o'clock on the dot. And she hadn't moved, hadn't tried to. The wheelchair was parked just inside the outer ring of the plaza, to the left of the main viewing area, close enough to see the tree but far enough back that she wasn't in anyone's way. That was something she'd gotten very precise about in the past 2 years, not being in anyone's way. The cold was the kind that sat in your teeth, dry and dense, the temperature hovering somewhere around 18 degrees with a wind coming off the Hudson that shaved it down further. She had a blanket across her lap, the expensive cashmere one her assistant Deborah had sent over last week with a card that read "warmth and healing for the holidays," which was the kind of thing people said when they didn't know what else to say. The blanket was gray. Ava had asked for charcoal. Close enough. She wore a dark coat, a scarf her mother had chosen, gloves she hadn't taken off since the town car dropped her. Her hair was pulled back, practical, controlled, the way she wore it to meetings when she still had meetings to go to. Dark brown, a few strands loosened by the wind. On paper, she looked put together. The rest of it was harder to explain. 2 years ago, Ava Collins had been the kind of woman people wrote articles about. Not the soft feature pieces about women in tech who talked about work-life balance and morning routines. The hard ones. Forbes, Wired, the ones with photographs that made her look like she was walking towards something with absolute certainty. She'd built Meridian Systems from a 3-person startup, operating out of a sublease in Chelsea, into a company worth 1,100 employees and a Series D that had closed at $420 million. She'd done it in 6 years. She'd done it largely without sleeping. The accident was not dramatic, which was the part that still bothered her some days. There was no moment of heroism, no terrible weather, no one to blame in a clean and satisfying way. A driver running a red light on 10th Avenue. A collision at low speed that somehow, in the specific cruel geometry of the moment, ended with Ava's spine taking damage that 2 surgeries and 18 months of intensive physical therapy had not fully undone. She could feel pressure, she could feel temperature. Some days she had sensation in her left knee that came and went like a radio signal. But walking was not a thing she did anymore. She had been told, carefully and by multiple people with medical degrees, that this was not necessarily permanent, that recovery was ongoing, that she should remain cautiously optimistic. She kept those phrases in a drawer in the back of her mind where she put things she wasn't ready to look at yet. The board had been patient, initially, then practical, then efficient. By the time the second surgery was done, the company she'd built had been restructured in ways that had been described to her as necessary for stability during a period of transition, which was corporate language for "we didn't wait for you." She still owned shares. She still had a title. But Meridian Systems ran without her now, and everyone involved had been very kind about the entire thing, which somehow made it worse. So here she was, Christmas Eve, alone in the middle of 40,000 lights, and not one person in this entire plaza who was looking at her. She watched a couple take a selfie in front of the tree, the man holding the phone up, the woman pressing her face against his shoulder, both of them laughing at something off screen before the camera clicked. She watched two kids chase each other in circles until the older one slipped on a patch of ice and went down hard, and the younger one stopped dead, uncertain whether to laugh or cry, before the older one got up and started laughing first, and the crisis passed. Normal things. Things she used to not even notice. The saxophone player finished "O Holy Night" and moved into something that might have been Silver Bells, but was also possibly a different song entirely. It was hard to tell. A woman nearby was on the phone speaking loudly, saying, "I told him I'd be there by 8. I don't know why he's making this into a thing." A group of teenagers somewhere behind Ava were laughing about something on someone's phone, the laughter spiking and dropping in that particular teenage pattern that was all peaks and no valleys. Ava looked at the tree. It was genuinely beautiful. She could admit that much. The lights ran gold and white mostly, with streaks of deep blue near the base, and the star at the top was lit from the inside so it seemed to pulse slightly, or maybe that was just her eyes losing focus in the cold. The branches were heavy with ornaments she couldn't make out from this distance. Color and shape, nothing more. The whole thing reflected off the ice rink below it, doubling, blurring, becoming something larger than itself. She'd been here before. Not in this chair, not from this angle, but she'd been here. She tried to remember who she'd come with. A work event, maybe 3 years back. A client dinner that ended with the group walking through the plaza because someone had insisted. She remembered heels on stone, the crowd pressing close, a glass of something warm someone had pressed into her hand. She couldn't remember who she'd been standing next to. That bothered her more than she expected. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. "Mom, are you coming to the house tomorrow? Your father wants to know what time to expect you. Also, Grandma Nora is asking about your diet. I told her you're fine. Let me know." She put the phone back in her coat pocket without responding. Her parents lived in Westchester, the house she'd grown up in, big, well-kept, a colonial with green shutters, and a driveway that seemed to her, as a child, to stretch for approximately a mile. Her father, Raymond Collins, had made his money in commercial real estate and had very specific opinions about how money ought to be handled, which included not talking about it, not worrying about it, and using it to insulate oneself from the kind of problems other people had. Her mother, Patricia, was the social coordinator of the two. Dinners, charitable boards, the careful management of appearances. When Ava had gotten hurt, both of them had stepped in immediately. Efficiently. Her mother had hired a night nurse within 48 hours. Her father had called the hospital administrator personally. Arrangements had been made. The apartment Ava had been living in, a fourth-floor walk-up in the West Village that she loved with an unreasonable passion, had been deemed unsuitable, and she'd been moved, while still in rehabilitation, to a ground-floor unit in a doorman building on the Upper East Side that her parents had selected, vetted, and partially paid for. It was a nice apartment, clean, accessible. Close to the hospital, she was still doing outpatient PT at. She had not been consulted on any of it. "You need to focus on healing," her mother had said, when Ava had tried to express some version of this. "We're just trying to make things easier." And Ava had been tired enough and broken enough in those early months that she had let it happen. She had let the night nurse come and go. She had let her mother buy the furniture. She had let Deborah handle the emails. She had let the weeks collapse into each other without objecting to any of it. The problem was that she kept letting it happen. And now 2 years had passed, and she was still living in the apartment she hadn't chosen, still working with the assistant who reported back to her mother, still showing up for the dinners in Westchester where her father talked about the company's performance in careful, protective terms, as if numbers were something that might upset her. She was 30 years old, and she was being managed. That was the thing she thought about, sitting here in the cold. Not the accident, not the legs, the slow, quiet, almost invisible process by which she had been reduced to someone who needed managing. The wind came through sharply, rattling the barrier fencing, and Ava pulled the cashmere blanket higher on her lap. Around her, the plaza hummed. She might have sat there until the cold won completely if it hadn't been for the sound. Not the music, not the crowd noise, She'd tuned all of that to background. This was different. A child's voice, high and clear, cutting through the general wash of December noise, the way a child's voice does when it's aimed with purpose. "Dad, Dad, look!" Ava didn't turn immediately. She heard the word, registered it somewhere peripheral, kept her eyes on the middle distance. "Lily, come back here." "But Dad, she's alone." Something in that pulled her attention sideways. She turned her head. About 12 feet away, near the edge of the plaza barrier, a little girl stood with her mittened hands pressed flat against the metal railing, staring directly at Ava with the kind of open, uncalculated attention that only very young children and very old people still permitted themselves. She was maybe 7, maybe 8, small-framed, wearing a red coat that was slightly too big in the sleeves, a white knitted hat with a pom-pom that had seen better days, and a scarf in an aggressively orange color that someone had clearly let her choose herself. She had her father's coloring, Ava would realize later. Dark hair, brown skin, serious eyes that were currently doing very serious work of examining a stranger without any apparent embarrassment about it. Behind her, a man moved toward her, reaching for her shoulder, and Ava got the impression of someone who'd been moving with purpose all evening and hadn't quite stopped. "Lily, you can't just stare at people. She's looking at the tree by herself." "Lots of people look at the tree by themselves." "Not like that." The man, her father, was 30-something, Ava guessed, with the kind of face that was harder to read than his daughter's. Medium height, broad shoulders, inside a coat that was decent but not new, a knit cap pulled down to his ears. He had the look of someone who worked outdoors or had at some point, not rough exactly, but solid in a way that didn't come from a gym. There was a weariness around his eyes that he was trying, visibly, to hold back from the rest of his face, like he was saving it for later. He looked at Ava. His expression went carefully neutral in the way people's expressions did when they were recalibrating quickly, when they'd been moving toward a situation with an apology ready and suddenly found themselves unsure what they were apologizing for. "Sorry," he said to Ava, not pity in his voice, just reflex, the way you'd apologize to a stranger whose personal space a dog had invaded. He gestured at the girl with a slight helplessness that suggested this explanation frequently proved insufficient. "Curious?" "I can see that," Ava said. Her voice came out more clipped than she intended. "The cold, maybe. Or the fact that she hadn't spoken to another person in 4 hours." She watched the man's expression register this, file it somewhere, not react. The girl, Lily, was still looking at her. "What's your name?" Lily asked. Direct. No social anxiety whatsoever. Ava blinked. "Ava." "I'm Lily." She said it with the confidence of someone who felt names were important information. "That's my dad. He's Ethan." Ethan, who clearly had strong feelings about strangers being given his full name by his 7-year-old, pressed his lips together but didn't correct her. "Hi," Ava said, because she couldn't think of anything else. "Why are you sitting here by yourself?" Lily asked. Lily, "It's fine," Ava said, and she wasn't sure if she meant "it's fine, she can ask," or "it's fine, I'm fine," but either way the words came out before she'd decided on them. She looked at the girl. "I wanted to see the tree." "We came to see this tree too." Lily said this like it established something significant between them. "Dad said we could come if I ate my whole dinner." "And did you?" "Most of it. The green beans don't count because they were slimy." "Lily." Ethan's voice had the tone of someone who'd had this conversation and hadn't expected to have it again tonight. "That seems fair," Ava said. Lily smiled. It was a sudden smile, wide and a little gap-toothed on one side, a baby tooth recently vacated, and it hit something in Ava's chest in a way she hadn't prepared for. Not sentimentally, not immediately, more like pressure, like something pressing carefully against a door that had been shut for a long time. "Are you cold?" Lily asked. "A little." "We have hot chocolate." "Well, we had hot chocolate." She looked up at her father. "We had hot chocolate, right, Dad? At the cart." "We did," Ethan confirmed. "We're out of hot chocolate." "Sorry," Lily told Ava, with genuine regret. "It's okay." Lily turned back to the tree. The conversation appeared to have concluded to her satisfaction, and she leaned against the railing again, watching the lights with the focused appreciation of someone giving a job proper attention. Ethan had not moved. He was still standing a few feet back, and Ava could feel him making a decision about whether to steer his daughter away or stay where they were. She looked at him. He looked at her. The moment held. "Merry Christmas," he said. Simple. Not forced. Not performed. The two words landing the way they were supposed to land, which was just human. Something went wrong with Ava's face. She couldn't have explained what exactly. The muscles did something involuntary. Her throat tightened. She turned back to the tree very quickly and pressed her lips together and looked at the lights until the sensation passed. "Merry Christmas," she said to the tree, and then corrected the direction of her voice. "To you too. Me." They stayed for 20 minutes. That was the strange part. They didn't leave. Lily asked several more questions. Whether the star was real gold? Ava told her probably not. Lily seemed unbothered. Whether the people ice skating below were professionals? Ava told her definitely not. Based on a man in the middle of the rink who had just taken a significant fall, Lily laughed. Whether Ava had a Christmas tree at home? Ava paused on that one. "A small one," she said. "How small?" "Tabletop. About a foot tall." Lily's face communicated that she found this number inadequate. "Our tree is 6 feet," she said. "That's a good tree. It fell over twice. Dad had to tie it to the curtain rod." She considered this. "It's fine now." Ethan made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "What?" Lily said. "Nothing." He was watching the rink. But there was something in the line of his jaw that had loosened. The held-back exhaustion she'd noticed at first had retreated slightly, replaced by something almost warm. Ava watched him while he wasn't looking. She had spent enough years reading people in rooms, boardrooms, investor meetings, the particular theater of professional negotiation, that she'd built up a habit of it that didn't fully switch off. What she read in Ethan Walker in those 20 minutes was a man carrying something heavy, who had chosen not to put it down for the evening. Not denial. He wasn't pretending. He was just choosing, the way you choose when you're doing it for someone else. The realization came to her slow and quiet, the way things did when they were true. He wasn't just giving Lily Christmas. He was also somehow giving himself enough of it to keep going. She didn't say that. "The tree's really something tonight," Ethan said at one point, not to either of them specifically, just noting it, standing with his hands in his pockets, looking up. "It is," Ava said. She meant it. For the first time in 47, now 67, minutes, she actually meant it. The lights felt different than they had before. Not prettier exactly, just present. Lily found a candy cane in the inner pocket of her coat, a discovery that seemed to surprise even her, and after examining it briefly, held it out to Ava. "You can have it if you want. I don't really like peppermint." "Then why do you have it?" "A man gave it to us at the cart. Dad said I had to take it to be polite." Ava looked at the candy cane. Wrapped in cellophane, slightly bent, the red and white slightly squashed from being in a pocket. She took it. "Thank you, Lily." "You're welcome." She said it with complete sincerity and then turned back to the tree, and that was that. They left at 7:15. Lily announced it was time by saying she was cold in her feet, which Ethan received with an efficiency that suggested he'd been waiting for this and had a plan. "Socks weren't thick enough," he said, mainly to himself. "I told you." "You didn't tell me," Lily said. "I strongly implied it." "That's not telling." He reached down and tugged her hat lower over her ears, a gesture so practiced it was automatic, and she submitted to it without looking away from the tree for one more long moment. Then she turned. "Bye, Ava," she said. "Goodbye, Lily." Lily looked at the wheelchair, and then at Ava's face, and then back at the tree, and made no comment about any of it. Then she walked toward the edge of the plaza, already pointing at something in the window of a shop across the street, and Ethan followed her. He stopped once, about 10 feet away, turned back. He didn't say anything else, just looked at her for a moment, not pityingly, not curiously. Something else. Something that felt less like an observation and more like an acknowledgement. The way you'd look at a person when you saw them, actually saw them. Then he turned and followed his daughter into the crowd, and Ava watched them until she couldn't see the orange scarf anymore. The town car came at 8. Martin, the driver her parents paid for, pulled up to the south entrance and called her cell the way he always did, and she wheeled herself across the plaza in the direction of the street, through the thinning crowd. The saxophone player had packed up. The lights were still going. The rink was still full. She had the candy cane in her lap, in her gloved hand, slightly sticky through the cellophane. She thought about what Lily had said. She's alone. Not like that. Children didn't know yet to dress up the things they observed. Lily had looked at her and seen something that other adults, with their careful neutrality and their managed expressions, had spent 2 years carefully not naming. And she'd named it the way children name things, without cruelty, without strategy, just cleanly. Like pointing at a color. She's alone. The car pulled up. Martin got out to help with the chair, as he always did, and Ava accepted his help, as she always did, and the chair folded into the trunk, and she settled into the back seat, and Manhattan moved past the windows at the pace of Christmas Eve traffic, which was to say it barely moved at all. Her mother's text was still unanswered. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put the phone away again and watched the lights strung along the storefronts go by. Red, gold, green, white. And thought about a man with tired eyes who'd said Merry Christmas like he meant it, and a little girl who'd given away a candy cane she didn't even want, and the 60 feet of lit Norway spruce reflected in ice, and what it had felt like to be seen. Just that. Not the CEO, not the patient, not the carefully managed problem. The person. The car moved through the city, and Ava held the candy cane, and did not cry, and did not have to explain herself to anyone. And for a few blocks, just a few, the tightness in her chest was something different than it usually was. Not pain, almost the opposite of it. She wasn't sure what to do with that. She looked out the window and let it sit with her, that small, unfamiliar warmth, as the city moved past and the Christmas lights went on and on and on. Martin dropped her at the building at 8:42. The doorman, Joseph, held the lobby door and said, "Merry Christmas, Ms. Collins." And she returned it, and the elevator took her to the 3rd floor, and the apartment was quiet and very clean, the way it always was when Deborah had been in. The small tree sat on the console table near the window, 1 foot tall, a dozen tiny ornaments, the kind that came in a set from a store, a little star on top that needed batteries she hadn't replaced. Ava sat in the middle of the apartment for a while, coat still on. Then she took her phone out, went to her mother's text, and typed back, "I'll be there at noon. Tell Dad not to wait on dinner." She set the phone down, looked at the small tree, thought about a 6-foot one tied to a curtain rod so it wouldn't fall over, and a little girl in an orange scarf who had pointed at a stranger in a wheelchair and said, with all the uncomplicated clarity of a child, "Look, Dad, she's alone. Look." Ava reached over and plugged in the small tree's lights. They came on, white, tiny, warm, and she sat with them for a while in the otherwise dark apartment. Outside, Manhattan went on being Manhattan, full of noise and light, and the particular excess of a city that never quite settled down, not even at Christmas, not even at night. Inside, something was different than it had been at 6:13. She couldn't name it precisely, but she didn't try to put it away. The candy cane was still on her nightstand on Christmas morning. Ava noticed it when she woke at 6:40, which was not intentional. She hadn't set an alarm, but her body had not adjusted to sleeping late in 2 years of trying, and so she was awake before the city was properly awake, lying in the dark with the faint sound of a garbage truck somewhere below, and the particular stillness of a holiday morning when even Manhattan takes a breath. She looked at the candy cane, slightly bent, still wrapped, the cellophane catching a thin strip of light from the gap in the curtains. She didn't know why she hadn't put it away. She'd come in, sat in the dark with the small tree's lights, answered her mother's text, and eventually gotten herself through the routine of the evening. The transfer from the chair to the bed, the motion she'd become efficient at even when efficiency felt like surrender. And at some point she'd set the candy cane on the nightstand and left it there without deciding to. She reached over and picked it up, turned it in her hands. "A man gave it to us at the cart. Dad said I had to take it to be polite." She set it back down and looked at the ceiling. Martin picked her up at 11:15 for the drive to Westchester. The highway was clear. Most of the city's traffic had already moved or settled, and he drove in the careful, unhurried way he always did, the radio low, some station playing instrumental versions of songs everyone already knew. Ava watched the city thin out through the window, the density of Manhattan giving way to the wider geometry of the outer boroughs, the bridges, the slow expansion of suburb. She thought about the man's face. Ethan. The way the exhaustion around his eyes had been real, but deliberately held back, like a debt he was deferring. The practiced ease with which he'd reached down to tug the hat lower on his daughter's head. The two words, Merry Christmas, that had required no performance, no calculation, just offered and released. She was not, she told herself, thinking about him in any particular way. She was thinking about the evening in the way you turn a stone over to see what's under it, not with expectation, just with the residual curiosity of a person whose mind didn't fully stop. The Collins house smelled like pine and warm butter when the housekeeper, Rosa, opened the door. The foyer had been decorated with the precision of someone who'd done it the same way for 30 years. Garland along the banister, a wreath on the interior door, a small arrangement of candles on the side table that no one was ever allowed to light. Ava's mother appeared from the direction of the kitchen within 30 seconds of her arrival, which meant she'd been watching the driveway. "You look thin," Patricia Collins said by way of greeting. "I look the same," Ava said. "Are you eating?" "Yes, Mom." "Deborah said you've been skipping the smoothies she leaves." Ava turned toward the sitting room rather than respond to this directly. Her mother's information network extended to her own kitchen, which was one of the smaller ways in which the apartment that was meant to be hers did not fully feel that way. Her father was in the armchair by the window with the newspaper, which he put down when she came in. Raymond Collins was 62, silver-haired, with the bearing of a man who had decided early that composure was an asset and had never revised that position. He stood to greet her, which he'd started doing after the accident, a small recalibration of courtesy that he would never acknowledge and she would never thank him for. "How was the drive?" he said. "Fine. Roads were clear." "You came in last night?" "To the plaza, to see the tree." Something moved in his expression. Not pity. Her father was too controlled for pity, but something adjacent to it. Concern dressed in neutrality. "Alone?" "Martin drove me." "That's not what I meant." "I know," Ava said. "Yes. Alone." He nodded slowly and picked the newspaper back up, which was his way of letting a subject close. Dinner was the three of them, plus her mother's sister Carol, who'd driven up from the city, and Carol's husband Dennis, who had strong opinions about interest rates and expressed them unprompted. They ate at the long table in the dining room, the one that seated 12 and felt theatrical with 5. The food was good. Rosa had cooked, and Rosa cooked well. And the conversation moved in the careful channels it always moved in at these dinners. The house, the weather, Carol and Dennis's recent trip somewhere, the market. Ava's father asked about Meridian twice, both times in the careful, distancing way, like he was asking about a car she used to own. "The Q4 numbers looked strong," he said, "from what I saw." "I don't really track it anymore," Ava said. "Still, must be good to see." "Sure." Carol, who was warmer than her sister and less careful about showing it, leaned over at one point and touched Ava's arm. "You seem better," she said quietly, while the others were occupied with dessert. "Than last Christmas." Ava looked at her. "Last Christmas I cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Carol nodded. "Like I said, better." It was the most honest thing anyone said to her all day. She left at 4. Her mother saw her to the car with the leftovers she hadn't asked for and the suggestions she hadn't requested. The new PT clinic in Midtown that a friend had recommended, the specialist in Baltimore, whose name Patricia had written on a card, as if Ava hadn't spent the better part of 18 months inside medical facilities already. She took the card, folded it, said she'd look into it. In the car, she put it in her coat pocket and watched Westchester recede. She was home by 5:30. The city was quieter than it had been the night before. The particular quiet of December 25th when the celebration is over and people are settling into the long interior of the holiday. The movies and leftovers and early bedtimes. Ava made tea she didn't want, sat with the small lit tree, and tried to read something on her tablet, and kept failing to. At some point she fell asleep in the chair, which was a thing she'd started doing and couldn't fully explain. Not the bed, just the chair near the window, like a person keeping watch. She woke at 9 with a crick in her neck and the tea cold beside her, and the city outside doing what it always did, indifferent and ongoing. She thought, for no particular reason she could name, about what Lily had eaten for Christmas dinner, whether the green beans had been slimy, whether the 6-foot tree was still tied to the curtain rod. She was doing it again. She picked up the tablet and tried to read. What? She found out his name by accident, or close enough to accident that she told herself that was what it was. 3 days after Christmas, she had a PT session at the rehabilitation clinic on East 63rd, Mondays and Thursdays, 50 minutes, with a physiotherapist named Jerome who had the practical, unsentimental manner of someone who'd spent a decade helping people through things they didn't want to be helped through. Jerome did not encourage. Jerome assessed. The distinction in Ava's experience was meaningful. After the session, she was in the lobby, waiting for Martin, who was consistently 3 minutes late, which she had stopped mentioning, when a woman near the reception desk said something that caught her ear. The guy from the parks department, the one who was here last week. Ethan, Walker, something. Ava looked up. The woman was talking to the receptionist, mid-conversation, something about a scheduling mix-up. She hadn't been addressing Ava. The name had just surfaced in the middle of a sentence and floated there. Ethan Walker. Ava looked back at her phone, typed nothing. She told herself this meant nothing. Walker was not an unusual name. There was no reason to assume it was the same person. The city had 8 million people and any number of Ethans. She sat with this reasonable conclusion for approximately 4 seconds. Then she opened her phone's browser and typed, Ethan Walker, NYC Parks Department. The results were not extensive, but they were enough. There was a city employee directory, partially public, partially not, and a mention in a neighborhood news site from 3 years back about a parks renovation project in the Bronx, with a brief quote from an Ethan Walker, listed as a parks maintenance supervisor, about the importance of community green spaces. There was a photo attached to the article, small, low resolution, but recognizable. The same face, slightly younger or less tired, it was hard to tell. He was standing in front of a newly planted tree, wearing a vest with the city logo on the chest. Ava stared at the photo for longer than she intended. She locked her phone. Martin arrived 2 minutes later, and she folded the chair into the car and looked out the window the whole way home without saying anything he didn't need to hear. January came in raw and gray, the way January did in New York. The decorations came down. The goodwill evaporated. The city resumed its standard operating mode of purposeful indifference. The temperature dropped further. The news was full of the usual beginning-of-year noise, projections, resolutions, the particular civic optimism that lasted until approximately the 3rd week of the month before collapsing under the weight of actual conditions. Ava's schedule returned to its structure. PT twice a week, the occasional remote meeting with Meridian's legal team about something she was still technically a party to, the dinners her mother proposed and she attended or declined in roughly equal measure. She had an occupational therapist she saw monthly, a therapist she'd started seeing in the fall who was named Dr. Reyes and who had the useful quality of not filling silences before they were ready to be filled. She told Dr. Reyes about Christmas Eve, about the plaza and the girl in the orange scarf and the man who'd said Merry Christmas without making it into a thing. What did it feel like? Dr. Reyes asked. Like someone turned a light on in a room I'd forgotten existed, Ava said. Then she made a face. That's terrible. No, it's... Tell me more about the room. Ava looked at her hands. Like, when he said it. I realized I'd been going through all these motions, the dinners, the PT, the calls with the board, and all of it had the quality of something done in the dark. Not sad, necessarily, just absent. And those 2 words just... She stopped. Made you present, Dr. Reyes offered. I was going to say they annoyed me? Dr. Reyes smiled slightly. Because I didn't want 2 words from a stranger at a Christmas tree to matter that much, Ava said. That feels like a lot of pressure to put on someone who doesn't know I exist. He knows you exist. You spoke for 20 minutes. He doesn't know me. Does that matter? Ava didn't answer that. She looked out the window at the January street, at a man walking a dog that was pulling hard in the opposite direction, at a woman in a yellow coat who was walking fast with a coffee cup and the particular focused expression of someone running exactly 4 minutes late. His daughter gave me her candy cane, she said. She didn't even like peppermint. She just gave it away. Where is it now? Ava was quiet for a moment. Still on my nightstand. Dr. Reyes wrote something in her notebook. She did it deliberately, not hurriedly, the way she wrote things she was going to return to. It was the Parks Department connection that gave her the next encounter, and she was honest enough with herself, eventually, after some negotiation, to acknowledge that it wasn't entirely coincidental. There was a community meeting in late January, held at a rec center in the Lower East Side, about a proposed renovation to a small neighborhood park, new accessible pathways, updated seating areas, the replacement of a broken play structure. Ava had been loosely involved in a nonprofit foundation that occasionally funded these kinds of urban projects, a connection she'd maintained from before the accident. The foundation's director had emailed her in the first week of January asking if she'd want to attend. Not as an official representative, just as a potential funding partner, someone who understood the space. She almost didn't go. She went through the reasons not to. The weather was brutal, the location was a 20-minute drive in traffic, she didn't know anyone who'd be there, and she admitted this privately, sitting with the email on a Wednesday morning, uncertain about what she was actually hoping for. She went anyway. The rec center was a low building on a street between a laundromat and a corner store, well maintained in the functional, unpretentious way of city community buildings that serve actual communities. Inside it was warm and smelled like an old gymnasium and folding chairs, and about 30 people were arranged in a rough semicircle, most of them residents of the neighborhood, several of them city employees in the Parks Department vests she recognized from the photo. She spotted him within 30 seconds of entering the room. He was standing near the front, beside a folding table with printed diagrams of the proposed park layout, talking to an older woman with a shopping cart and the emphatic gestures of someone who had opinions about benches. He was in the city vest, a thermal layer underneath, looking exactly like a man who'd spent the day outside in January and hadn't had time to change. He did not notice her come in. There was no dramatic moment of recognition. She took a position near the back of the room, in an accessible space beside the last row of chairs, and she sat there and she watched him work, which was not something she planned, but which happened. He was good at it. That was the thing, not in the polished way of someone trained in public engagement, in the opposite way. He listened more than he talked. When the woman with the shopping cart moved from benches to drainage issues, he didn't deflect. He wrote something down, said, "That's a real problem, I'll flag it for the engineer," and meant it. When a man at the front of the room asked an aggressive question about timeline, his manner suggesting he'd been given timelines before that hadn't held, Ethan didn't get defensive. He said, "That's fair. The last project ran 6 months over. Here's what we're doing differently this time." And he said it like someone who understood why trust had to be earned rather than assumed. Ava watched him do this for 40 minutes. At the break, coffee and store-bought cookies on a side table, he crossed the room to refill his paper cup and looked up and stopped. She watched the recognition move across his face. Not surprise exactly, more like a rapid series of adjustments. His eyes went from neutral to alert to something that wasn't quite certain of itself. "Ava," he said. "Hi." He looked at the room, then back at her. "You're here for the park project?" "I'm connected to a foundation. We fund accessible infrastructure projects sometimes." She kept her voice level, professional. She'd prepared this explanation on the drive over, which she was not going to admit to anyone. He seemed to be deciding whether to complete the sentence. "That's good. We need the funding. The accessible pathway piece is actually the part most likely to get cut first if the budget tightens. That's usually how it goes." "Yeah." He looked at his coffee cup, back at her. The uncertainty she'd seen in the first look had settled into something less readable. "You live near here?" "Upper East Side." Long way to come for a neighborhood parks meeting. I wanted to get out of the apartment. He nodded slowly. She couldn't tell if he believed her. She wasn't entirely sure she believed herself. How was your Christmas? He asked. The question was simple and she hadn't prepared for it. Westchester, she said. My parents' house. It was fine. Good. A pause. Yours? Something shifted in his face, subtle, quickly managed. Good, he said. Lily got the bike she wanted. Took me an hour and a half to put together at midnight, but he moved one shoulder. Worth it. She enjoy it? First ride, she made it about 4 feet and hit a fire hydrant. Cried for 10 minutes, then got back on. He said this with the particular combination of exasperation and pride that seemed to be the default setting of parents talking about children who were also, against all evidence, doing fine. She's fine. Ava almost smiled. She seems like she would be. The break was winding down, people moving back toward chairs, and Ethan glanced toward the front of the room where his colleague was setting up for the second part of the presentation. I should, he gestured vaguely. Of course. He didn't move immediately. 1 beat. 2. It's good to see you, he said, and she could tell it wasn't a reflex, that he'd chosen to say it and meant it the same way he'd meant Merry Christmas. Just a fact, offered plainly. You too, she said. He went back to the front. She stayed in the back. The meeting resumed and she sat through the rest of it taking real notes. Pathway grades, surface materials, the ADA compliance thresholds the contractor had quoted. And when it was over, Ethan was occupied with the older woman again and a group of 3 residents, and she didn't wait. In the car home, Martin had the radio on low, the same instrumental station as Christmas Eve, and Ava sat with her notebook in her lap and looked at her notes, and thought that she had not been to a community meeting in 2 years, had not walked into a room full of strangers in 2 years, and that her hands, while slightly cold, had not shaken. Not once. She sent the foundation director an email that night recommending the park project for consideration. She outlined the accessible pathway component specifically, included the budget shortfall figures she'd noted during the presentation, and marked it as a priority review. She'd sent hundreds of emails like it before. Recommendations, assessments, allocations. This one took her 20 minutes to draft, which was longer than it should have, but the final version was clean and professional and correct. She reread it twice before sending. Then she sent it. Cute. February moved slowly, the way February always did. The city's most stubborn month, the one that offered no charm to offset the cold, no holidays with enough weight to pull people out of themselves. It was the month that tested people, or at least that was how Ava had always thought about it, even before the accident. She went to PT, she saw Dr. Reyes. She attended 2 more foundation meetings, one remote, one in person. She called her mother back for the first time in 9 days and had a conversation that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and no longer. She thought about Ethan Walker more than she intended to, which was a fact she was still in the process of deciding what to do with. Not romantically, or at least not in any way she was prepared to name. More like the way a person thinks about a window they discovered in a room they thought they knew. The room is the same room, but now there's light in it, and that changes the nature of the room. She looked him up again, not intrusively. She wasn't capable of much beyond what was publicly available, and she didn't try to go beyond that. She found a little. He'd been with the city parks department for 6 years. He lived, based on the address listed in the neighborhood meeting attendance sheet she'd been given, somewhere in Astoria, Queens. There was no social media presence she could locate, which meant either he was private or he didn't have the energy for it, and based on what she knew of his daily load, she suspected the second. She found one more thing, almost by accident, a death notice in a Queens community paper, 4 years old. Mara Walker, 28, beloved wife and mother. A short paragraph. A photo of a woman laughing at something off to the side of the camera, her eyes bright, her face easy with happiness. A woman who had not had any idea the photo was being taken. Ava read it once, then she closed the browser. She sat with the weight of it for a while, the way you sit with weight that isn't yours but touches you anyway. 4 years ago. Lily would have been 3, maybe 4, old enough to have the shape of her in memory. Maybe. The age where you can't be sure what stays and what blurs. She thought about Ethan at the park meeting, saying she's fine about his daughter with that combination of exasperation and pride, and she thought about what it must cost him, every day, to make that sentence true. She wanted to say something to him. She didn't know what. She didn't have a mechanism for it that didn't feel presumptuous, or strange, or like more than what the situation was. Two people who'd met at a Christmas tree and exchanged 40 minutes of conversation across two encounters, one of which had been, on her part, not entirely unplanned. She was not going to manufacture a third encounter. She was almost certain of this. It was in this state of almost certainty that she received, on a Tuesday morning in the second week of February, an email from the Foundation's director. The Parks project had been approved for partial funding. The director was coordinating a small site visit for the following week, the accessible pathway portion specifically, and it included Ava in the invite list as the recommending member. Ava stared at the email. Then she opened her calendar and marked it. She told herself it was because accessible infrastructure was something she genuinely cared about, which was true. She told herself it had nothing to do with anything else. This was partially true. She closed the calendar and looked at the candy cane on her nightstand, which she still had not moved, and which she was no longer pretending to have an explanation for. Outside, February did what it did. The city moved through it anyway, because it had no other option, and because cities, like people, learned to move through the months that offered them nothing on the working assumption that something better was eventually coming. Ava made tea. Actually drank it this time. She looked at her small tree, still sitting on the console table, still plugged in, though Christmas was 7 weeks gone. She hadn't unplugged it. She kept meaning to. But every night she came back to the apartment and it was the first thing she turned on, and some part of her. Not the part that managed companies or read financial reports or navigated the careful social architecture of her family. Some other part, the part that had sat in the cold on Christmas Eve and felt for a moment genuinely present. That part wasn't ready to take it down yet. She left it on. The site visit was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 10. Ava arrived 7 minutes early, which was a habit she'd never managed to break despite having, for the past 2 years, very little that required punctuality. The park was small, a corner lot that the neighborhood had clearly been using for years in spite of its condition rather than because of it. 2 benches with peeling paint, a chain-link fence along the east side, a play structure that had been cordoned off with orange plastic netting, the kind of netting that communicated clearly that something had failed structurally and no one had gotten around to replacing it yet. In the center, a large oak tree, old and serious, its bare branches making a complicated pattern against the February sky. 3 people from the foundation were already there when she arrived. The director, Marcus, who was 60 and moved like someone who'd worked in nonprofits long enough to stop expecting gratitude. A younger woman named Sue Jin, who handled the accessibility compliance assessments, and a man from the contractor's team with a clipboard and new boots that suggested he didn't usually do site visits. Ethan arrived at 3 minutes past. He came from the east entrance, walking quickly, eating the last of something that looked like a granola bar and shoving the wrapper into his coat pocket as he approached. He shook hands with Marcus, nodded to Sujin, and then he saw Ava and did the adjustment. That rapid recalibration she'd come to recognize as the face he made when he was buying himself half a second. "Good morning," he said. "You had granola for breakfast," she said. He looked at his coat pocket. "Granola bar. It's different." "Is it?" "Yes." A pause. "Marginally." The site visit lasted 90 minutes. Marcus led most of it. Sujin took measurements and photos, and the contractor moved around the edges of things making notes. Ethan walked the perimeter twice, once listening, once alone, and Ava tracked the way he moved through the space, the way he moved through the community meeting, like someone who actually knew the place. Not from the drawings, from the ground. At one point he crouched near the northeast corner where the proposed pathway would connect to the street curb and looked at the grade for a while. Just looked. Then he stood and said to no one in particular, "This cut's wrong. The angle's too steep for a manual chair. It needs to come down another 1.5 inches at minimum." Sujin looked at her measurement. "The spec says it's within compliance." "Compliance is a floor, not a ceiling." He said it without judgment, matter of fact. If someone's pushing themselves, not being pushed, they're going to struggle here. Worth flagging before the poor. Sujin wrote it down. The contractor made a note. Ava hadn't said anything. She was looking at the curb cut, at the angle, thinking about what it would actually feel like to navigate it. The forward pull, the effort required in the wrists, in the arms, in the whole upper body doing the work that the ground refused to help with. "You're right," she said. Not loudly. Ethan looked at her. He hadn't known she was listening or hadn't expected she would say anything. His expression did something brief, not surprise exactly. More like he heard something in her voice and registered it and chose not to examine it in public. "Yeah," he said. Just that. They moved on. After the visit, Marcus and the others went to a diner on the next block to debrief over coffee. Ava joined them, and Ethan came too. Marcus had asked him directly, the way people who ran nonprofits learned to ask people whose expertise they needed and couldn't afford to hire. The diner was warm and crammed and smelled like bacon fat and dishwater, the vinyl booth seats repaired in 2 places with electrical tape. Ava took the end spot at the table. Ethan sat across from her, which was not arranged but became a fact. Marcus talked about timelines. Sujin talked about the compliance documentation. The contractor talked about material costs in a way that clearly anticipated negotiation. The coffee came in thick ceramic mugs, the kind that held temperature well and were impervious to being dropped, and Ava wrapped her hands around hers and let the meeting flow. At one point, Marcus turned to Ethan and asked, "What's your read on the community? Any pushback we should be ready for?" Ethan considered this. Mrs. Cabrera, older woman, shopping cart. She's been coming to meetings since before I took this territory. She's going to show up at the poor date and have opinions about the bench placement. Specifically, she wants the west bench moved about 4 feet toward the oak. She thinks the current position is too exposed. Is she right? Probably. The shade pattern in summer would be better. I'd move it. Marcus made a note. Anyone else? The bodega owner on the corner thinks the new fence design is ugly. He's not wrong. It is kind of ugly, but the old fence is a safety issue, so we managed that conversation. How? Ask him if his nephew can do the fence post painting. Kid's been trying to get community mural work. Give him the east panel. Ethan said this like it was obvious, like all problems were just other problems in disguise. 2 birds. Marcus looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone recalculating an assessment. "You've been doing this long?" 6 years. "You're good at it." Ethan shrugged once. Not false modesty. Genuine discomfort with being told something he didn't know how to answer. He picked up his coffee. Ava was watching him. She did this, and then she looked at her own coffee and told herself to stop. The others got up to leave at the same time. Marcus had another meeting. Sujin had a site in Brooklyn. The contractor had somewhere to be in an urgency. Bills were sorted, coats retrieved, and somehow, in the shuffle of it, Ava and Ethan were left at the table, the only 2 who hadn't moved. The diner noise continued around them. A short-order cook called something to a server. The table behind them had a toddler in a high chair who was methodically dismantling a pancake. "You don't have to be somewhere?" Ava asked. "Not till noon." He looked at his watch, an actual watch, analog, the band slightly worn. "Got 40 minutes. "Coffee, then." "Coffee," he agreed. The server refilled both cups without being asked, which was the best kind of service. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Not uncomfortable silence, something more like the silence between people who aren't sure yet what register to use and are deciding. "The curb cut thing," Ava said. "Yeah." "How did you know the spec was wrong? Just by looking?" He set his cup down. "I've been doing accessible pathway retrofits for 4 years. I've seen enough bad cuts to know what they look like from a distance. Also," he paused, "my brother-in-law is a manual chair user. I've watched him navigate bad curb cuts about 1,000 times." She hadn't expected that. She reordered slightly. "Is he local?" "Jersey. We see him a couple times a month. He and Lily have this whole thing. He taught her to play chess. She's currently beating him regularly, which he cannot accept." Something crossed his face. Warm and real and slightly complicated. He was Mara's brother. He said it without hesitation, but she heard the particular care with which he placed the name. The way you say the name of someone you've made peace with losing, but haven't made peace with having lost. Mara was your wife, Ava said, keeping her voice level. Yeah. He looked at his coffee. She died 4 years ago. Cancer, not... It wasn't sudden. It was the long kind, which is its own thing. I'm sorry. Thank you. Not reflexive. He actually received it, which most people didn't do. They deflected or qualified or moved on quickly. He just took it and let it sit for a moment. Daniel, her brother, he's been good with Lily. It helps. Ava thought about the boy who was currently losing at chess to an 8-year-old. Lily strikes me as someone who would be very serious about chess. He looked up. She keeps a notebook of games, match records, strategies she's trying. She's 8. He said it with the helpless wonder of a man who'd expected to understand his child more than he did. I don't know where she got it from. Not from me. Mara? Mara couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. He smiled, briefly and fully, the kind of smile that carried loss in it but wasn't diminished by the loss. She moved fast, made decisions, course-corrected. Lily got the sitting and thinking gene from somewhere I haven't located. Ava looked at her coffee. Maybe it's just hers. He considered that. Maybe. He turned his cup on the table, once, a small rotation. What about you? You built Meridian from nothing. That kind of thing requires a particular kind of sitting and thinking. She looked at him. You looked me up. It wasn't an accusation. She'd looked him up too, and they both probably knew it at this point. After the park meeting, he said, figured I should know who I was talking to about funding. Professional. Practical. He held her look. Ava Collins, CEO, Meridian Systems. 420 million Series D. 6 years, 1,100 employees. A beat. That's a lot of sitting and thinking. It's a lot of not sleeping, she said. Different thing? Fair. She didn't say the rest of it. The accident, the board, the careful restructuring. He might have read it, or some of it, or he might have read the bare outline and filled in the shape of things. She didn't ask. What she noticed was that he hadn't brought it up the way people did. With the particular softening of voice that preceded managed sympathy, he'd mentioned what she'd built, not what she'd lost. Which was, she realized, the first time anyone had done that in 2 years. The accessible pathway piece, she said, shifting. If the grade gets corrected and the funding holds, what's the realistic timeline? He accepted the shift without comment. If weather cooperates and the contractor doesn't run into substrate issues, 6 to 8 weeks from pour date, could be March, early April. I want to come back when it's done, he looked at her. Yeah? I want to see it done correctly. Something in his face settled. Not quite a smile, but directional. I'll send you the schedule when we have a pour date confirmed. Through Marcus? Or directly, if you give me your contact. She pulled out a card, old habit, she still carried them, and slid it across the table. He picked it up, looked at it, put it in his shirt pocket without ceremony. You still have the same cell listed on here? Why wouldn't I? Just checking. He finished his coffee. CEOs change numbers sometimes. Privacy. Former CEO, she said. He looked at her. Not with the softening she expected, just straight. You built the company. That doesn't expire. She didn't answer that. She looked at the table, at the electrical tape repair on the booth seam, at the small ceramic creamer that someone had placed slightly off-center. Then she said, Is Lily doing okay? In general, since Christmas? The question came out less formally than she intended. He registered the shift, the move from professional to something else, and his expression went briefly unguarded, the tired eyes version of himself surfacing and then steadying. She's good, he said. She started drawing again, which she stopped for a while after Mara, and then she started again around her birthday, so. He moved his hand slightly. Good sign. What does she draw? Right now, mostly the park near our apartment, trees, specifically. He looked almost rueful about it. She's been asking to go back to the plaza, the big tree. The Christmas one's gone by now. I know, she knows. She wants to go back to where the tree was. He looked out the diner window at the February street. I told her we could go in spring. Ava thought about a child who drew trees and kept chess records in a notebook, and wanted to return to the spot where something had happened that she didn't yet have words for. She thought about her own small tree, still on the console table, still plugged in every night, performing the same service. "Good answer," she said. He turned from the window. "Was it?" To take her back. "Yes." She paused. "Sometimes you need to see a place again after something happens in it, to make sure the place is still there." He looked at her for a moment, really looked, the way he'd done on Christmas Eve, the way that had no pity in it, just attention. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's it exactly." He texted her the following Tuesday. Not about the park schedule. She'd half expected that. A professional message with dates and logistics, the kind of text that was really an email wearing different clothes. What came instead was, "Lily got first place in her school chess tournament. She made me send this to someone who would understand why that's remarkable." Ava looked at the message for a moment. Then she typed, "That's remarkable because she's 8 and she has a strategic notebook?" His reply came in under a minute. "She's 8 and she has a strategic notebook." Yes. Exactly. She was in the middle of an email to Meridian's legal team about a licensing matter. She set the phone down, finished the email, sent it, and picked the phone back up. "Tell her I said congratulations. Also that the notebook is the right call. People who don't document their thinking lose half of it." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "She wants to know if you keep a notebook." "I keep 4. A longer pause this time. She says that's the correct number. Ava set the phone down with the closest thing to a genuine laugh she'd produced in longer than she could remember. It came out small and slightly rusty and startled her enough that she sat with it for a moment, paying attention to what it felt like. Not performed, not managed, just there. The texts continued, sporadically, in the way of 2 people who have been given a reason to communicate and are working out the frequency. Not every day, not with any fixed pattern. Sometimes 3 messages in an afternoon, usually when something had happened with Lily that needed an audience who would appreciate the specific absurdity of it. The Chess Notebook. A school project about ecosystems that had somehow expanded to include a hand-drawn map of the tree canopy in their neighborhood, rendered in colored pencil with a precision that Ethan described as, quote, "alarming." The ongoing fire hydrant grudge match between Lily and the bike, which he reported Lily was winning. Sometimes it was about something else. He asked once on a rainy Thursday whether she'd ever followed through on any of the specialist recommendations her parents had pushed on her. She told him about Baltimore, about the card she'd put in her coat pocket and not thrown away. He didn't respond for a while. Then, "You don't have to go if you don't want to, but you also don't have to not go because someone else wants you to." She stared at that for a long time. "Those are the same thing," she wrote back. "No, they're not. One is your choice, the other one is the opposite." She didn't answer that night, but she found the card in the coat pocket the next morning, and she put it on her desk instead of back in the pocket, and she looked at it while she was on the phone with the foundation, and she didn't put it away. The thing about Ethan Walker was that he was not, in any obvious way, a complicated man. That was the thing Ava kept reaching for and kept finding more under. He worked for the city parks department. He supervised maintenance crews, managed community relations, walked the parks in his territory in all weather, kept a schedule that started at 6:30 and rarely ended before 5. He did this on top of getting Lily to school, picking her up, managing the logistics of a household that was just the 2 of them, plus the occasional help from Daniel, Mara's brother, who lived 40 minutes away in Jersey and came when he could. He didn't talk about it as something extraordinary. He didn't perform it. When she asked him once in a text that she second-guessed for several minutes before sending, "How do you manage all of it?" his answer was characteristically direct. "Most days I don't, completely. You just figure out which pieces absolutely have to happen and you do those. Everything else you renegotiate." What gets renegotiated? Sleep. A lot of sleep. Cooking. "I'm a mediocre cook. Lily has accepted this. My social life is pretty much non-existent, which I was going to fix and then didn't." "Why didn't you?" A longer pause than usual, because for a while it felt disloyal, and then by the time it stopped feeling that way, the habit was already gone. She read that twice, thought about the things that could be said to it, and discarded most of them. What she finally sent was, "That makes sense." He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was just, "Yeah." But the next text came 2 hours later, unprompted. "Lily wants to know if you'd want to see the park when it's done. Like, come by when the pathway's finished. She says, and I'm quoting, 'The lady with the wheels should see it because Ethan made sure the curb was right.'" Ava stared at the words "the lady with the wheels" for a moment. Then she thought about Lily, who had given away a candy cane she didn't want, who named strangers without embarrassment, who drew trees in colored pencil. And she realized that the phrasing wasn't careless. It was just accurate. No extra weight, no performed sensitivity, just Lily, pointing at the world and saying what she saw. "Tell her yes," Ava wrote back, "and tell her Ethan is right to be proud of the curb." "I didn't say I was proud." "You're proud." Another pause, marginally. She set the phone down. Through the window, the February light was already shifting, not toward warmth, not yet, but toward the tentative longer days that meant something, in theory, was coming. The city went about its business below her. The small tree sat on the console table, lights on, 7 weeks past its occasion. She'd looked up the Baltimore specialist's information 2 days ago, had not called yet, but had looked. That was the thing about change. It rarely announced itself. It didn't arrive with clarity and resolution. It arrived like a curb-cut grade, a small correction, an inch and a half, the difference between someone being able to move under their own power and someone needing to be pushed. She'd spent 2 years being managed, the apartment she hadn't chosen, the assistant who reported to her mother, the board that had restructured her company in the quiet of her absence. All of it justified, all of it presented as care, all of it slowly removing from her the thing she hadn't known how to name until recently. Agency. The right to move under her own power. She picked up the card from her desk. The Baltimore specialist. Read the number. She didn't call today, but she opened her calendar and she blocked a date in March, 2 weeks out, and she wrote in the event field, "Make the call." Then she plugged in the small tree, even though it was not yet dark, and she sat with it for a while in the late afternoon February light, thinking about a park she hadn't seen finished yet, and a little girl who drew trees, and a man who understood the difference between a floor and a ceiling. The text from her mother came on a Sunday. "Your father and I have been discussing your situation. We think it might be time to talk about longer-term arrangements. The Westchester house has the east wing, more space, easier access. We've had someone come to assess the layout. Just an option to consider. Call me." Ava read it standing, sitting, technically, but with the particular quality of stillness that preceded a decision. She read it again. Then she put the phone face down on the counter and walked to the window, wheeled herself to the window, and looked at the city, which was cold and ongoing and indifferent to her family's floor plans. Her mother had had someone assess the layout, without mentioning it, without asking. The east wing of the Westchester house was nice, large, quiet, 35 minutes from the city on a good traffic day, which meant effectively removed from the city, from the foundation meetings, from the PT clinic on East 63rd, from everything she'd started, slowly, painstakingly, to rebuild around herself. The east wing would be comfortable. It would be managed. It would be the apartment she hadn't chosen, but larger and further and more complete. Her hands were in her lap. She looked at them. She thought about what Ethan had texted her weeks ago when she'd told him about the Baltimore card. "You don't have to not go because someone else wants you to." She picked the phone back up, opened her mother's message, typed, "I'm not moving to Westchester. I know you mean well. We should talk, but the answer is no." She sent it before she could revise it into something softer, more diplomatic, more managed. The read receipt appeared. 3 dots. Gone. Her phone didn't ring. She sat in the apartment that wasn't entirely hers yet, in the city that was, and she breathed, in and out. The radiator knocked against the wall the way it did when the building's heating system was working against itself. Outside, a cab honked once, twice, and then the sound moved away. The small tree was on the console table, lights on. She was still there. That counted for something. That counted for more than she'd known how to say, for longer than she wanted to admit. She pulled up Ethan's contact in her phone. She didn't text. She just looked at the name for a moment. Ethan Walker. No emoji, no note, just the name. The same way he'd said Merry Christmas. Just the thing itself without decoration. Then she put the phone in her lap and sat with the February city and the lit tree and the residue of the text she'd finally sent and let the evening come. Her mother called at 9:17 the following morning. Ava let it ring through to voicemail, which she had not done to her mother in 2 years, possibly longer. Patricia Collins left a message that was 6 minutes long. Ava listened to it while making coffee, not sitting down, just holding the phone and looking at the counter. The message was not angry. That was the thing about her mother. Patricia Collins did not get angry in ways that announced themselves. She got careful. The 6 minutes were careful, methodical, each sentence placed precisely, a structure built not to confront but to contain. She said she understood that Ava wanted her independence. She said of course she respected that. She said nobody was forcing anything. She said the assessment of the East Wing had just been exploratory, just wanting to know what was possible, just wanting Ava to have options. She said the word just 11 times. Ava counted. She called back at 10. "I got your message," she said. "Good." Her mother's voice had the particular quality it had when she was managing a conversation she hadn't planned for. Smooth, but slightly accelerated. "I just want you to know, Mom." Ava kept her voice even. "I heard what you said, and I understand that you think you're helping, but you had someone come to the house to assess the layout for me without telling me. That's not exploring options. That's making a plan." Silence on the line. Short, calibrated. "We were going to bring it up when it was far enough along that saying no would feel like disruption instead of just a preference." Ava set her coffee down. "I know how the process works. I've run it." Another silence, longer this time. "Ava, we're worried about you." "I know." "You're alone. You've been alone for 2 years. The apartment is mine, or it's close enough." She stopped, started again, more carefully. "I know why you stepped in after the accident. I know you did it because you were scared. I was scared too. But that was 2 years ago, and I'm not the same person I was coming out of that second surgery, and I need you to treat me like I'm not." Quiet. Then quietly, "Are you angry with us?" Ava thought about this. The real answer was complicated, and she didn't have all of it yet. "No," she said, "but I need things to change, starting with decisions getting made with me instead of for me. Can you do that?" Her mother didn't answer right away. That was something, at least. She wasn't performing agreement, she was actually sitting with it. "Your father will want to talk to you," Patricia finally said. "Tell him to call me directly." "Ava?" "Mom, I'll pick up." She would. That was the thing. She wasn't shutting the door. She was just insisting on being the one who opened it. They said goodbye. The call ended. Ava sat in her kitchen with the coffee that had gone slightly cool and looked at the window, at the March sky outside. Still gray, still cold, but with a quality to the light that was different from February, a marginally greater willingness to be present. She thought about what she'd just said to her mother. The clean articulation of it, the absence of flinching. She picked up her coffee and drank it cold. Bucket. Her father called 3 days later. Raymond Collins, unlike his wife, was not a man who worked in circles. He called at 8 in the morning before Ava's PT session, and he said, "Your mother told me what you said. I want to hear it from you." "Which part?" "The part about decisions being made for you." She told him. Not the 6-minute version, the real version, the one she'd been assembling for 2 years without knowing she was doing it, the apartment, the furniture, the assistant who reported back, the careful management of her access to her own company during the restructuring, the way information had been filtered and softened and translated, as if she might shatter on contact with the truth of her own situation. Her father listened. She could tell he was listening because he didn't interrupt, and Raymond Collins interrupted when he thought he already knew where something was going. He didn't interrupt once. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she checked the phone to confirm the call was still connected. "The restructuring," he said finally. "I was on the advisory call when they discussed the transition plan." She'd suspected this. She hadn't known it. "And?" We thought you weren't in a position to handle it, to handle the pressure of fighting it while you were recovering. That might have been true, Ava said, at the time, but you didn't ask me. You decided, and then you managed the information. Another long silence. You're right, her father said. She hadn't expected that, the bluntness of it, no qualification. We should have asked, he said. Even if we would have made the same decision, we should have asked. Ava sat with this, with the particular sensation of being seen by someone who hadn't quite managed it before, and the complicated mix of relief and old grief that came with it. Not resolution. One conversation didn't undo 2 years, and 2 years didn't undo the patterns of a lifetime. But something. Thank you, she said. Are you? He paused, started again. Is there something specific you need from us? To do this differently? She thought about it. Yes, when I make decisions, I need them to hold, even if you think they're wrong. Unless someone's in actual danger, the decision stands. And the Westchester conversation is over. A pause. All right, she said. They talked for another 10 minutes, stiffly, not with warmth exactly, but with a kind of honest awkwardness that was more real than the careful performance of their usual conversations. Her father asked about the foundation work. She told him about the park, about the curb cut, about accessible infrastructure as a meaningful problem that had specific solutions. He listened with the focused attention he gave to problems that had specific solutions. Before he hung up, he said, "Send me the foundation's annual report when you have it." Why? Because I know people who give money to things, and I'd rather point them somewhere useful. It was the most direct offer of support he'd made to her in 2 years. It came wrapped in practicality and delivered without sentiment, which was exactly how Raymond Collins delivered everything he meant. I'll send it, she said. She made the call to Baltimore that afternoon. The specialist's name was Dr. Kwan, and his assistant was professional and efficient and got her an appointment in 4 weeks, which was faster than she'd expected. She'd half expected the act of calling to feel significant, ceremonious, the kind of moment that announces itself as a turning point. It didn't. She called, she spoke to an assistant, she confirmed her insurance, she hung up. Then she sat in the quiet of the apartment and felt something that wasn't hope exactly, but was in the same neighborhood. Something that required the future to exist. That evening she texted Ethan. I made the appointment. He responded within the hour. Baltimore? Baltimore. Good. Just that. Not that's great, or I'm so proud of you, or any of the responses that would have made her feel like a child being praised for doing something she should have done long ago. Just good. Like a fact being confirmed, like someone nodding across a table. She found, not for the first time, that his economy with words did something that other people's full sentences didn't. The park finished in the second week of March, 4 days ahead of the contractor's revised schedule, which Ethan texted her about with the exact level of mild vindication that she'd come to recognize as his version of enthusiasm. Poured yesterday, passed inspection this morning, ahead of schedule. The contractor surprised you. I surprised the contractor. There's a difference. How? Showed up every day. People work differently when they know someone's paying attention. She believed that completely. She also suspected that the someone in this case had done more than pay attention, had shown up with specific knowledge and specific standards and a willingness to hold both. But she let him have the modesty. The visit was on a Saturday morning, which meant Lily was there. Ava arrived at the park to find them already standing near the new pathway. Lily crouched down, examining the surface texture with the focused scrutiny of a small structural engineer. The oak tree was still bare but beginning to suggest the intention of leaves, tiny buds along the branches, the first real evidence that March was doing something underneath its cold surface. The park looked different, not transformed exactly. The chain-link fence was still on the east side. The bodega owner's nephew had painted it, but the colors were slightly uneven, which gave it a quality that was handmade in a way the rest of the park wasn't. The play structure was new, still had that slightly aggressive brightness of things that hadn't been weathered yet. The benches were positioned as Mrs. Cabrera had wanted, shifted 4 feet toward the oak for the summer shade. The pathway was clean gray concrete, new and exact, The curb cut at the northeast corner, done at the corrected grade. Ava rolled onto it from the street without breaking pace. No pull, no resistance in the wrists. The transition from sidewalk to pathway was level. She stopped at the center of the path and looked at it under her. "Well," Ethan said. "It's right," she said. "Told you. You told Marcus and Sujin. That's different." "She's being technical," Ethan said to Lily, who had looked up from her surface examination. "That's the correct way to be," Lily said, with the tone of someone delivering an assessment, and went back to examining the concrete. Ava looked at the oak tree, at the sky going pale blue through the branches, at the new bench where Mrs. Cabrera would sit in the summer shade when the leaves came in. "It's a good park," she said. "It will be," Ethan said. "Needs a season." "Everything does." He looked at her sideways, not saying anything, just acknowledging. Lily stood up, brushed off her knees, and came to stand beside Ava's chair with the comfortable ease of a child who had decided, at some earlier point and without fanfare, that this was a normal arrangement. She looked at the path. "Did you know," Lily said, "that smooth concrete is actually harder to stop on than rough concrete? In the winter, because ice." "I didn't know that." "I read it." She looked at the path. "But this kind has the texture strips at the edges, so it's okay." "Detectable warning strips," Ava said, "for navigation." "Yeah," Lily nodded seriously. "We learned about accessibility in school. Our teacher says the city is getting better at it, but still has a lot to do." "Your teacher is right." "I told her about the park. She wants our class to come see it." Ethan looked at his daughter with the expression Ava had started to think of as his "how did I get you" face, the combination of bafflement and pride that surfaced whenever Lily did something that was simply, unmistakably, entirely herself. "You didn't tell me that," he said. "I'm telling you now." Lily looked up at Ava. "Can they come?" "It's a public park, so I think yes, but—" "It's a public park," Ava confirmed. "They can absolutely come." "Good." She seemed satisfied with this. "I'm going to look at the new play structure." She moved off toward the structure with the purposeful stride of someone on a schedule, and Ethan watched her go for a moment and then turned to look at the path. "She planned a field trip," he said. "Apparently. Without asking anyone." In her defense, she asked the relevant person. He made a sound that was close to a laugh. They stood, one sat, in the pale March sunlight with the park around them and the city beyond its fences doing what it always did. "The foundation email came through," he said. "Partial funding confirmed, remainder pending the second phase assessment." "I know. Marcus copied me." "Right." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for pushing that. It was the right project." "Still," he looked at the curb cut. "The pathway wouldn't have gotten built without the funding, and the funding might not have happened without someone making the case internally. So, you made the case at the community meeting. I just—" She stopped. "Showed up," he said. She looked at him. He was still looking at the path. His profile in the March light, the line of his jaw, the slight tension he carried even when he was being still, the worn watch, the coat that was decent but not new. "Ethan," she said. He turned. She'd thought about how to say this over the weeks since February, had started sentences in her head and found them wrong, had decided several times not to say anything yet, and several times reconsidered. What she arrived at now was not the version she'd rehearsed, because what she'd rehearsed had been too structured, too managed. What came out was closer to the truth. "I want to say something, and I want to say it clearly so there's no confusion about what I mean." He waited. He was good at waiting. "These past few months have been the first time in 2 years that I felt like a person making choices instead of a problem being administered. And a significant part of that has been—" She made a small gesture that she immediately felt was inadequate and pushed through. "You. Not in a, this isn't something that needs to be a thing if it doesn't. Ava." She stopped. "You can just say it," he said. Not unkindly, not impatiently, just, "You can say it." She exhaled. "I didn't know I was disappearing until someone looked at me." He held that for a moment. The park made its small noises around them. The creak of the new play structure under Lily's weight, a pigeon negotiating the new concrete. On Christmas Eve, he said. Yes. He nodded. Not minimizing it, not inflating it, just receiving it the way he received most things, steadily, with attention. I think about that night too, he said. Yeah? I was trying to get Lily home before she admitted her feet were cold, which, by that point, was inevitable. And then she stopped. He looked toward the play structure. She always stops for the thing other people walk past. She stopped for me. She stopped for you. He turned back. I'm glad she did. The moment had a particular quality of uncertainty in it, the kind that was not uncomfortable, but that both of them were holding carefully, not fully formed, not resolved. Something between question and answer that hadn't found its sentence yet. I'm going to Baltimore next week, Ava said. The appointment. How are you feeling about it? Scared? Realistic? Those two things can coexist, it turns out. They do, he said, frequently. Your experience? 4 years of it. A pause. The first time I took Lily to a pediatric grief counselor, I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before going in. I was absolutely certain I was doing it wrong, that the fact that I needed help meant I was failing. Were you? No. Lily told me last year that those sessions were some of the most important things that happened to her after her mom died. 8-year-old said that. He shook his head slightly. Verbatim. Ava thought about Lily's colored pencil tree maps, her chess notebook, her immediate and uncomplicated understanding of the world she observed. She tells the truth, Ava said. Relentlessly, Ethan said. It's terrifying, and I don't want her to ever stop. From across the park, Lily's voice. Dad, the slide is faster than the old one. Good or bad? A pause while she considered this seriously. Good. Probably. He turned back to Ava, and she saw the thing she'd seen on Christmas Eve. The exhaustion present, but chosen to be put aside. The choosing visible, but not in a way that asked for anything. What time's your appointment? He asked. 10:30. I'm taking the train down the night before. By yourself. She looked at him. Yes. He held her look, not pressing, not backing down either. Okay. My mother offered to come. 3 times. But you said no. I said I'd call her after. He nodded. That's good. That's the right... He stopped himself. Sorry, you didn't ask for my... No, you're right. I think it is. She looked at her hands. I'm still learning the difference between accepting help and surrendering to it. That's a hard line. Very. She looked up. How do you know where it is? He thought about it. Actually thought. The way he thought about the curb cut grade, with precision rather than speed. I think it's about who's driving, he said finally. If you're deciding what help you need and asking for it, that's one thing. If someone else is deciding what you need and delivering it to you whether you asked or not, that's the other thing. Yeah. My parents have been doing the second thing for 2 years. I know. He said it without accusation, without drama, just acknowledgement. Do you think the conversation you had with them changed anything? I think it might have. I don't know yet. She looked at the oak tree. My father asked for the foundation's annual report to share with his network. Ethan looked at her. That's significant, he said. For him? Yes. She felt something complicated in her chest when she said it. The old grief and the new possibility sitting next to each other without resolution. He's not going to transform overnight. Neither is my mother, but they heard me. I think they actually heard me. That matters. It does. She looked at the path again, the clean, straight line of it, the corrected grade, the texture strips at the edges. It's not enough to fix everything, but it's not nothing. 2 weeks later, Dr. Kwan's office in Baltimore was on the 4th floor of a medical building that smelled like all medical buildings. Antiseptic and recycled air, and the peculiar institutional quiet that settled over places where people came to receive news of various kinds. His assistant was kind without being solicitous. Dr. Kwan himself was 60, Korean American, with the manner of someone who had given difficult information enough times to have learned how to give it without it becoming a performance. He reviewed her imaging, the surgical records, the physical therapy assessments Jerome had sent over at Ava's request. He asked questions she hadn't been asked before, not about what she couldn't do, but about what she could do, and when, and under what conditions, and what had changed. He examined her for 40 minutes. He was specific and careful, and he talked to her like someone conducting an investigation rather than delivering a verdict. Afterward, he sat across from her and said, "There are two things I want to tell you. The first is that your PT work has been more effective than your previous assessments have indicated. You have substantially more functional capacity in your lower extremities than the clinical notes reflect, which tells me your therapy program may have plateaued rather than reached an actual ceiling." She sat very still. "The second thing," he said, "is that I want you to come back in 6 weeks for a full functional reassessment with my team. I'd like to put together a new program that's more targeted than what you've been doing. It's not going to be fast, but I think your situation is more recoverable than you've been told." She heard the word recoverable. She had been careful with words like this for 2 years, hopeful language that eventually became the cruelest kind. She held it at a distance, examined it. "What does recoverable mean in specific terms?" she asked. He respected the question. He answered it specifically. Percentages, timelines, ranges, what was likely and what was uncertain, and where the science was still open. He did not dress it up. He did not sell it. By the time she left the building, the March afternoon had gone bright and cold, the Baltimore streets doing their ordinary business. She sat outside the building for a while. On the accessible exit ramp, which was a good one, smooth, correct grade, well-maintained, she noticed this automatically, the way she'd started noticing these things. She called her mother. Patricia answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting. "How was it?" her mother asked. "He wants to see me again in 6 weeks, Ava said. "He thinks I have more capacity than my current program is working with." Silence. Then, in a voice her mother used very rarely, not the careful, managed voice, just the plain one, "Oh, Ava." "It's not a guarantee," Ava said quickly. He was very specific about that. "It's a possibility that needs to be explored, not a—" "I know," her mother said. "I know that." A pause. "I'm so glad you went." "You can't say I told you so." "I wouldn't." "You were going to." "I was absolutely going to, but I won't." Ava felt something strange move through her chest, close to the thing she'd felt on Christmas Eve, pressure against a door. But from the other side now, pushing outward. "Mom," she said. "Yes." "The East Wing conversation is still closed." "I know. But maybe dinner in Westchester, next month, if the weather improves." Quiet on the line. Then, carefully, like something being placed down gently, "I'll make the lamb you used to like. The good one, not the overcooked version." "The good one," her mother agreed. She hung up and sat for a moment more on the Baltimore ramp in the March cold. Then she opened Ethan's contact and typed, "Dr. Kwan wants to see me again in 6 weeks. More capacity than I thought. Not a guarantee, but something." She sent it. His reply came while she was navigating toward the ride she'd arranged. Something is the right word for it. Then a minute later, "Lily says hi. She's been asking about you." Ava looked at that, at the matter-of-fact way it was delivered. "Lily says hi. She's been asking about you." Like it was ordinary. Like it was simply a thing that was true. "Tell her hi back," Ava wrote, "and that the park in Baltimore has a terrible curb cut. She should put it on her list." "She now has a list," Ethan replied. "You've created something." She almost laughed. Almost, and then fully, a real one. Sharp and slightly unexpected, out there on the Baltimore ramp in the March afternoon with nobody to hear it. She put the phone in her pocket and looked at the sky, which was doing that early spring thing of not quite committing but trending in the right direction. Cautious optimism, as they said. The phrase she'd kept in the back drawer for 2 years. She took it out, held it. It felt, today, like it might be the right size. When she got back to the city that evening, she went directly to the apartment. Not her parents. Not anywhere else. She wheeled through the lobby, said hello to Joseph at the door, took the elevator to the third floor. The apartment was the same, clean and still and quietly hers, in the way it had been becoming, slowly, since February. The small tree was still on the console table. She'd finally, 3 weeks ago, taken the ornaments off and unplugged it, letting it be just a small artificial tree on a table rather than a symbol of anything. But she hadn't put it away. She put her coat on the hook by the door, made tea, sat by the window. The city was doing what it did in the evening. The movement of it, the particular density of lives occupying a small vertical space, the lights coming on in windows across the street as the March dark settled in. She thought about Baltimore, about Dr. Kwan's specific undecorated word, recoverable. She thought about the park in March light, and Lily examining concrete, and Ethan saying you can just say it in the way of someone who'd given up waiting for things to be easier than they were. She thought about her mother's plain voice, not the managed one, saying, "Oh, Ava." She thought about what it had taken to get from Christmas Eve to here. Not one gesture, not one turning point, not the clean arc of a story. Something messier. A series of small corrections, each one requiring a decision, each decision requiring a choice between the door and the room. She'd kept choosing the room. She looked at the phone, at Ethan's last message. "She's been asking about you." She put the phone face up on the table beside her tea. Outside, the city moved. Below her window, someone was laughing. A real laugh, the kind that happened to a person rather than being produced by one. She listened to it until it faded. The tea was good tonight. She'd done it right. The temperature, the steeping time, small things. She picked up the phone, opened her calendar. Confirmed the Baltimore appointment in 6 weeks. Confirmed the Westchester dinner in April. Then she opened a blank note and wrote, without knowing exactly why, but doing it anyway. Things that are mine. She looked at what she'd written. Then she started a list. The apartment. The decision to go to Baltimore. The phone call to her father. The text she'd sent her mother without softening it first. The foundation work. The park and its corrected curb. The candy cane, still on the nightstand, which she also had not moved and had finally stopped pretending to have an explanation for. The new therapy program that hadn't started yet. The dinner in Westchester that was just dinner, not surrender. The text she was going to send tomorrow, asking Ethan if Lily wanted to come to the park with her when the leaves came in, the way he'd promised she could in spring. She looked at the list. It wasn't long, it wasn't everything, but it was hers, and it was real, and it had taken 2 years and a Christmas tree and a child in an orange scarf to begin. She saved the note, put the phone down, finished her tea. Spring came to the city the way it always did. Not gently, not dramatically, but in the argumentative way of a season that had to fight for every degree. March gave up its cold reluctantly. April arrived with rain that couldn't decide if it wanted to be winter or not. But somewhere in the 3rd week of April, the oak tree in the corner park put out real leaves. Not the tentative suggestion of buds, but actual leaves, green and committed. And Ava noticed them on a Tuesday afternoon when she came by to check on the pathway after a heavy rain, making sure the drainage was holding. She texted Ethan a photo of the leaves. He replied, "She's going to want to draw that. Bring her Saturday. She'll hold you to it. I'm counting on it." Saturday came overcast but dry, which in April was as good as it got. Lily arrived at the park carrying a canvas tote bag that contained, as she explained to Ava without being asked, 3 different pencil types, a sharpener, a kneaded eraser, and a sketchbook that was not the same as her chess notebook because they were for different kinds of thinking. "That makes sense," Ava said. "I know," Lily said, and settled herself on the bench under the oak tree with the focused preparation of someone setting up a workstation. Ethan sat on the other end of the bench with a cup of coffee from the cart on the corner. He'd started doing that, not asking if she wanted anything, just bringing an extra cup and setting it in the drink holder clipped to her chair's armrest and not making a point of it. She'd started not thanking him for it after the 3rd time, because they'd tacitly agreed that the thanking made it awkward and the coffee was just a fact. She drank it and watched Lily draw the tree. Lily drew slowly and with great seriousness. She would look at the tree for long periods, longer than seemed necessary, longer than most children sustained attention for anything, And then look at the page and draw a few lines and look back. She held the pencil lightly. She made marks and then considered them and sometimes erased them and sometimes didn't. She does this for an hour sometimes, Ethan said quietly, not to interrupt. I know, Ava said. She'd come twice before this with them, on Saturdays since the park finished. She knew the rhythm of it now. It's how she thinks. You used to draw? No, I built spreadsheets, same function, different medium. He looked at her sideways. You're saying a spreadsheet is the same as, he gestured at Lily's sketchbook. A system for making sense of what you're looking at. Yes. She took a sip of coffee. Don't make that face. I'm not making a face. You're making a face. He looked away and she could see the side of his jaw doing the thing it did when he was suppressing something. Not sadness, just the particular private amusement he didn't always let all the way out. She'd come to know that jaw, the tells of it, the way it held things he hadn't decided yet whether to say. The April morning went on around them. Two kids on bikes navigated the new pathway with the wobbling confidence of children who had not yet fully internalized that falling was a possible outcome. An older man with a small terrier stopped to read the new park information board. There was one now, a small mounted sign with the accessible features listed and the Foundation's logo in the corner, which Ava had noticed the first day it went up and had not mentioned to anyone, but had sat in front of for a few minutes alone before leaving. The second Baltimore appointment was last week, she said. I know. You told me. I know I told you. I'm saying it again because the results came in yesterday and I didn't say anything yet. He turned, set the coffee down, gave her his full attention in the way that still caught her slightly off guard. Not because it was intense, but because it was just completely present. No performance in it. Just here. Dr. Kwan's team ran the full functional reassessment, she said. The new program has been running for 6 weeks. The results... She stopped. Not for drama, because the words still required some handling. There's measurable improvement in nerve signal conduction in my left side. More than the first assessment showed. He thinks with the targeted program, over the next 12 to 18 months, I have a reasonable chance, not a guarantee, he was very clear, of recovering partial standing function, maybe more. Ethan was quiet. It's not walking, she said. Not necessarily. It could be, but that's the best case end of a range that has a lot of uncertainty in it. But it's more than you thought. Significantly more. She looked at her hands. I spent 2 years being told I'd plateaued, that I was at my ceiling. Turns out the program I was on had plateaued. Not me. There's a difference. A significant one, she exhaled. I cried in the parking garage in Baltimore, which I'm telling you so you don't have to pretend you can't tell. I've been crying. He looked at her face. I wasn't going to pretend. I know. That's why I'm telling you. He nodded, picked up his coffee. They sat together in the particular quiet of two people who had run out of the need to fill space with noise. From the bench, without looking up from her sketchbook, did something good happen? They both looked at Lily. Yes, Ava said. Good. She turned a page. The tree is harder than I thought. The branches go in different directions. That's what makes it worth drawing, Ethan said. Lily considered this. That's probably right, she conceded, and kept going. The new therapy program was harder than anything Ava had done in 2 years. Dr. Kwan's team worked differently from Jerome's, not better or worse, just differently oriented. Where Jerome had been about maintenance and function, about managing what existed, Kwan's people were about pushing at edges, finding where the signal still traveled, asking the body to do things it had given up on. It hurt some days in ways that were productive and ways that weren't, and the difference between those two kinds of hurt was a thing she had to learn. She called Dr. Reyes after the third session, which was the hardest one so far, and described the experience in terms that she hadn't used for her own body in a long time. Agency, effort, the feeling of working towards something rather than maintaining something. How does it feel? Dr. Reyes asked. Like I'm learning to be angry again, Ava said. Angry at what? She thought about it. At the assumption that I was done, that the ceiling was the ceiling. She looked at her hands, the familiar hands that had signed documents and managed negotiations and been folded in her lap for 2 years. I was angry at the accident for a long time, and then I stopped because the accident was already over, and being angry at something over was just sitting in a room with the lights off. And now? Now I'm angry at what came after, at the managing, at the way I let it happen. She paused. At myself, a little, for letting it go on as long as it did. That's fair, Dr. Reyes said. Not dismissing it, not softening it. But not too much, Ava said. I was also just trying to survive. Also fair. Both can be true. Yes, Dr. Reyes said. They can. She went to therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and she kept her Monday remote calls with the foundation, and she attended the quarterly meeting where Marcus presented the annual report, the one her father's contacts had seen, which had resulted in 2 new funding commitments by May, neither of them enormous, but both of them real. Raymond Collins had sent her a brief email when the second one came through. I'm told the park project was a model for the proposal. Good work. No more than that. She had read it 4 times. She had written back, thank you. The curb cut was the right call. Her father had replied, it usually is. She didn't know entirely what he meant by that, or how much of it was about the park. She suspected it was about more than the park. She left it there. Her mother came to the apartment in May, the first time Patricia Collins had been to the Upper East Side place rather than the other way around. She arrived with flowers Ava hadn't asked for, which was Patricia, and she immediately noted 3 things in the apartment she thought could be improved, which was also Patricia, and then she sat down and had tea and looked at the small tree still on the console table and said, without moving her expression significantly, you still have the Christmas tree. It's not a Christmas tree. It's a tree. It has a star on top. Lots of things have stars on top. Her mother looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Ava. You seem different, she said. Than Christmas? Than the last several years. Maybe longer. Ava considered deflecting. Didn't. I think I am, she said. Patricia nodded once, carefully, and drank her tea. She didn't press for detail, which was itself different. The old version of this visit would have had a list of follow-up questions designed to assess, categorize, and plan around whatever Ava was feeling. This version just let the statement sit. It wasn't a transformation. Patricia Collins was still Patricia Collins. The flowers, the interior design notes, the scheduling instincts that never fully shut off. But something had shifted in the register of it. Something had been said in that February phone call, and her father's call, and the months since, and it had changed not the people but the space between them. Less managed, more honest, still imperfect, still requiring effort, still the particular friction of people who love each other badly and have to keep deciding to do better. Before she left, her mother said at the door, the lamb dinner is still open, whenever you want. June, Ava said. Early June, after the next Baltimore trip. I'll make the good one. I know you will. Her mother left, and the apartment was quiet again, and Ava sat with it, and found that the quiet felt different than it had in January. Less like an absence, more like a room with good light and the window open. She told Ethan about the therapy progress in fragments, over months, the way you tell someone things when you're still deciding what they mean. He received each piece the same way, present, specific, neither minimizing nor overweighting. He asked the right questions, which were mostly the functional ones. What does this session target? What did the assessment show? What's the next step? He didn't ask how she felt about it, because by then he knew that she'd tell him when she was ready, and that asking too early collapsed the process. This was one of the things she had understood slowly about Ethan Walker. He did not lead with emotion. He led with attention. The emotion was there, she knew it was, had seen it surface in unguarded moments, in the way his voice changed when he talked about Mara, in the specific quality of his eyes watching Lily from a distance when Lily didn't know she was being watched. But he carried it the way he carried most things, steadily, internally, spending it where it would do something rather than letting it run. She had spent a lot of time in those months thinking about what it was exactly that she felt for him. Not because the feeling was complicated, it wasn't, not anymore, but because she wanted to be honest with herself about it in a way she hadn't always been honest about things. The pre-accident version of Ava Collins had been good at knowing what she wanted professionally, and not very practiced at knowing what she wanted in the quieter parts of her life. She'd treated relationships with the same efficiency she'd brought to everything else. And efficiency was not the same as care, and she knew the difference now in a way she hadn't then. What she felt for Ethan was not efficient. It was inconvenient and slow-moving and didn't resolve itself into a clean assessment. She cared about him specifically, not the category of him, not the archetype of a kind man who'd been good to her when she needed it. Him. The worn watch and the granola bar, and the way he said marginally as a complete sentence. The fact that he'd spent 6 years learning which parks in his territory had bad drainage and which ones had good soil for what kind of tree. Not because anyone would ever know or promote him for it, but because the work was real and required real knowledge, and he had decided that mattered. She told him in June, not on a grand occasion, not with preparation. They were in the park, the same corner park. A Saturday, Lily, in the process of completing a full-color version of the oak tree that had taken 3 separate sessions to get right, and Ava had been watching him watch his daughter, and the watching had that quality it sometimes got, the quality of looking at something you don't want to lose. And she thought, you could keep not saying it. You've gotten very good at that. She said, I think I've been in love with you since February. He turned from looking at Lily. His expression went through several things in rapid sequence, ending on something that wasn't surprise exactly, but was the face of a man who had been waiting for an external event to confirm an internal calculation. February, he said. The diner. When you said compliance is a floor, not a ceiling. He looked at her. Don't flatter yourself, she said. It happened gradually. The diner was just where I dated it to. I'm not flattering myself. A pause. He stopped, tried again. I've been careful. I know. Because you were going through things, and I didn't want to be something that happened to you while you were going through things. She heard the precision of that. Something that happened to you. Like a weather event. Like one more external force acting on a person who'd already had too many external forces acting on her. You're not, she said. You haven't been. How do you know? Because I got to choose this. Nobody arranged it. Nobody managed it toward an outcome. I found you in a neighborhood parks meeting because I made a decision to go, and the decision was mine, and what came after it was also mine. She looked at him steadily. That matters. You don't know how much that matters. He was quiet for a moment. The park made its ordinary sounds. Lily turned a page in her sketchbook, looking for more space. I know some of how much it matters, he said quietly. She believed him. I haven't, he started, stopped. The careful man being careful. Since Mara. I haven't let anything get close enough to be a decision. For a long time I told myself it was about Lily, that I needed to be focused on her, and that was true mostly. But it was also, he looked at the oak tree, easier to not be a person who had that kind of thing available to them. And now? He looked back at her. And now I'm standing in a park. I built a better curb cut in because of you, and my daughter is drawing a tree. She came back to see because of you, and the answer to your question is yes. He said it plainly, no decoration, just the word and what it was carrying. Yes, whatever the actual question was. The actual question was whether you felt anything similar to what I just described. The answer is yes, he said, again, and this time there was the jaw. The held-back thing fully released, and it turned out to be a real smile, wide and slightly undone, the kind she hadn't seen on him yet. The exhaustion still there in the eyes, but competing with something else now. Something that wasn't winning exactly, but was at least fighting. From the bench, without looking up, Are you two done being weird? They both looked at Lily. We weren't being weird, Ethan said. You were being quiet in the weird way, not the normal way. She examined a line in her drawing, decided against it, erased it. It's fine. I figured it out. You figured what out? She looked up. Looked at both of them with the complete and unembellished attention that was simply how Lily Walker engaged with the world. That you like each other, like actual like. She returned to the drawing. I've known since January. Ethan stared at his daughter. She always knows, Ava said. She's 8. She knew I was alone from across a plaza, Ava said. In the dark, in a crowd. Don't underestimate her. Lily looked up again briefly. Ava's right, she said, and went back to the tree. They did not rush. That was the truth of it, and it was important, and Ava understood it the way she'd come to understand the things that mattered. Not as a romantic idea, but as a practical fact. Ethan was a man with a full life. Lily's school, Lily's schedule, the job, the parks in his territory, the Saturday trips to Jersey to see Daniel, who had become a fixture in Ava's peripheral awareness as a person who played chess with his niece and drove a manual chair and once, on a call she hadn't known Ethan was on, been described by Lily as basically a second dad except he loses at chess. The full life had edges, and she respected them, and he respected hers. The therapy, the Baltimore trips, the foundation work, the ongoing slow renegotiation with her parents that was neither resolved nor abandoned. They had dinner the first time in July, without Lily. A restaurant in Brooklyn Ethan had chosen because it had good accessible entry and a quiet corner table and food he was actually confident about, which was, he told her, a short list. He was nervous in a way he didn't try to hide, which she found unexpectedly affecting. The composed man with the quiet exhaustion, slightly off his footing, eating his food in a way that suggested he wasn't fully tasting it. "You're nervous," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her. "Because this matters. Things that matter make me nervous. I've had a long time of not having things that matter in this particular way, and I forgot what it felt like. It feels like not tasting your food." "Apparently, yes." She picked up her wine. "I'm nervous too. You don't look it. I ran a company that raised $420 million. I know how to look calm when I'm not." She set the glass down. "I'm also not as nervous as I expected, and I've been trying to figure out why." "And?" "Because it's you," she said, "which makes it less frightening than it would be otherwise. Does that make sense?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his fork and actually ate something, and she took that as a yes. The Baltimore appointments continued through the summer and into the fall. Dr. Kwan's team marked progress in the methodical, precise way of people who understood that hope required specificity to be trustworthy. By August, Ava had standing function with support. Parallel bars, a few seconds at a time, the effort enormous and the seconds real. By October, the parallel bars had extended to a walker in controlled conditions. Dr. Kwan was careful with language, always careful, and she appreciated that about him because she'd learned to be careful too. Hope was not the same as certainty, and she'd stopped needing it to be. She told Dr. Reyes about the first time she stood in October for 11 seconds with the walker and Jerome spotting her. "I cried," she said. "Of course you did," Dr. Reyes said. "Not the way I expected. I thought it would feel like winning something. It felt more like finding something I'd misplaced." She thought about how to say it. Like the version of me who stood up wasn't different from the version who'd been in the chair. They were the same person, and I hadn't expected that. I'd been so focused on walking as a destination that I forgot the person arriving would be the same person who left. What did that feel like? Like not having to become someone else to have a life back. She looked out the window, the November street, like the work wasn't about turning into a different Ava. It was just about giving this one more room, Dr. Reyes wrote in her notebook. The good writing, the kind she came back to. Set, her parents came to the apartment in November. Both of them, together, which they hadn't done since the early days after the accident. Her father carried a bottle of wine he'd selected with visible intention. Her mother brought nothing, which Ava recognized as effort. The deliberate restraint of someone who'd made a decision not to arrive managing things. They saw the apartment for what it was now. Hers. The books she'd chosen, the furniture she'd slowly and deliberately replaced piece by piece as she could afford to and as it suited her. The small tree still on the console table which neither of her parents commented on. The notebook on the desk, the real one, not a tablet, a paper notebook, where she'd been keeping track of the PT program, the foundation projects, the things she was building. Dinner was takeout because she'd offered to cook, and they'd both said no, which was the right answer because she was not, she was willing to admit, a skilled cook. They ate at her table, the four of them, herself and her parents, and the city outside the window, and the ghost of all the dinners in Westchester where the space between them had been filled with performance instead of presence. It wasn't perfect. Her father talked about the market at one point, and her mother made one comment about the apartment's lighting that Ava let pass without engagement, filing it under the category of things that were just Patricia and not worth the energy. But there was also an hour, in the middle of it, when her father asked about Dr. Kwan's most recent assessment in the direct way he asked about things he actually wanted to understand. And she told him the walker, the seconds, the timeline. And he listened with the careful attention he gave to real information. And when she was done, he said, "I owe you an apology." She looked at him. "For the restructuring," he said, "the way we handled the information during your recovery. I said we should have asked, but I should also say I'm sorry. Not as a general statement, specifically." He looked at his wine. "We treated you as a problem to be solved. You weren't a problem. You were in a hard situation, and you needed support, not management. And I knew the difference. I just—" He stopped. "You were scared," Ava said. "Yes. So was I. I know that now." He looked at her. "I should have known it then." Her mother was very still across the table. Ava looked at her. "I know," Patricia said quietly. Not to the room, to Ava specifically. Ava held that. "I know," she said back. They had dessert from the same place as the rest of the meal, little cups of something chocolate that her father ate with the focused appreciation of a man who had decided to enjoy small things, which was, Ava realized, something she hadn't seen him do before. The loss and the recovery of the past 2 years had moved through the whole family, not just her. Had done its own restructuring. They left at 9. Her mother hugged her at the door, a real one, held for a moment longer than usual. Her father shook her hand and then, not quite smoothly but unmistakably deliberately, squeezed it before letting go. She watched them to the elevator, watched the doors close. The apartment was quiet, good quiet, hers. Christmas Eve came back the way it always did, with the same 40,000 lights, the same 60 feet of Norway spruce, the same city wrapping itself in the particular excess of the season. The plaza was packed, which it always was, the crowd pushing against the barriers for the tree view, the ice rink below it full, the saxophone player, or possibly a different saxophone player, working through the familiar repertoire with the same variable results. Ethan found a spot near the south barrier. He'd brought the thermos this time, hot chocolate, the real kind, made before they left Lily's apartment in Astoria, where Ava had been for dinner and where Lily had shown her the completed full-color oak tree drawing, now framed on her bedroom wall, the branches going in their different complicated directions in colored pencil that had taken 6 Saturdays to get right. Lily was wearing a new coat, navy blue this time, the right size, and a purple hat she'd chosen herself, and a scarf that was, again, in an aggressively orange color that was clearly either her signature or a committed ongoing preference. "You went back to orange," Ava said. "Orange is correct," Lily said with finality, and turned to look at the tree. The tree was the same tree, or the same kind of tree. Another Norway spruce, another 60 feet, another 40,000 lights. The lights ran gold and white and deep blue near the base, the star pulsing at the top. Below it, the ice rink reflected everything doubled. A woman skated in slow circles near the edge, better than she needed to be for a public rink, and a father near the center moved in careful steps while his small child held his hands with the grip of someone who had not yet committed to trusting gravity. Ava looked at it, at the whole composition of it, the tree, the lights, the rink, the city rising behind it, the people arranged around its edges in every configuration that people arranged themselves in when they were living their lives. A year ago, she had sat here and felt invisible, present in body, absent from everything else. She had been in this exact spot, or close to it, a few meters to the left, inside the outer ring, and the world had been moving around her and through her, and she had been something it moved past. She was not that now. She was not exactly the person she'd expected to become either. She was still in the chair. The walker was a progress, not a conclusion, and Dr. Kwan's timeline extended into next year and the year after. She was still in the apartment she hadn't originally chosen, though it was hers now in all the ways that mattered. She was still learning the distance between accepting help and surrendering to it, still getting it wrong sometimes, still having to recalibrate. Her parents were still her parents, the pattern of them still intact at its edges, still requiring effort to navigate. There was still the morning PT session she didn't want to get up for. Still the board meeting minutes she received from Meridian and read with the particular complicated feeling of something that was hers and wasn't anymore. Still the occasional night when the old darkness came back and settled in, and she had to wait it out, and the waiting was the work. None of it was resolved in the clean way. None of it was going to be. But she was here. In the crowd, not at its edge. In it. Ethan handed her the thermos cup without ceremony. She took it. The hot chocolate was good, better than the cart version, which she already knew because Lily had made this declaration several times on the walk over with the authority of someone who had done comparative analysis. Lily had her sketchbook. Of course she did. She was standing at the barrier, looking at the tree, not drawing yet. Just looking, in the way she looked at things that were going to be drawn, with the patience of someone who understood that you had to see something fully before you could make it yours on paper. "She's going to draw the tree," Ethan said. "Yes. In 40,000 lights. She'll figure it out." Ava looked at him. "She always does." He was looking at the tree too. The rink-reflected light caught the side of his face. The familiar face now, the worn watch, the lines around his eyes that she'd stopped reading as pure exhaustion because she knew now what else was in them. He had a new coat this year, she noticed. Similar to the last one, but newer. The fabric still holding its shape. She hadn't said anything about it. He hadn't said anything about it, but it was there. 1 year, she said. 47 minutes, he said. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. "You looked it up," she said. "You told me. In February." She had told him. A text, late at night, when she'd been thinking about it. "I was here for 47 minutes before you two showed up." She hadn't thought he'd kept it. "You remembered." "I remember things," he said simply. She looked at the tree, at the lights in it, at the way the colors moved in the cold air, the slight shimmer that came from her eyes adjusting to the brightness, or from the string arrangements, or from the particular physics of cold air and warm light that she'd never fully understood. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Okay. Last year when you said Merry Christmas, I almost didn't handle it well. I turned toward the tree so you wouldn't see my face." She held the thermos cup in both hands, not because it was too much, because I'd forgotten what too little felt like. I'd spent so long being looked through that 2 words said like they meant something, just 2 words, almost knocked me over. She paused. "I didn't know how close I was to the edge until you pulled me back from it. Without knowing that's what you were doing." He was quiet, listening in the way he listened. "I'm not the same person I was standing here a year ago," she said. "I'm not fixed. I'm not transformed. I'm just more myself than I was. And a significant amount of that is because of you and that kid." She looked at Lily, still at the barrier, still waiting to start. "And I needed you to know that explicitly, out loud, in the place where it started." Ethan was quiet for long enough that she looked back at him. His jaw was doing the thing, the held thing, but not held this time. Released. His eyes had the quality they'd had in the diner, in April, and all the moments when she'd caught him without his careful guard fully in place. Open and slightly undone, and entirely real. "I know," he said. "I know that." He said it not dismissively, but the way he said things he'd already made peace with, in facts he'd looked at and decided were true. "And for what it's worth, you did something for me too, which I didn't think was going to happen." He looked at the tree. "Not specifically. I just mean, I'd gotten used to the idea that the most important parts of my life were behind me. Mara and the early years of Lily and the person I was then. And everything from here was just..." He moved a hand slightly. "Forward motion. Manageable. Good enough." "Good enough," she said. "And then you were just there, In a corner of a plaza. He looked back at her. Being the angriest sad person I'd seen in a long time. She almost laughed. I wasn't angry. You were a little angry. I was cold. You were cold and angry and completely alone, and you had the posture of someone who'd been told one too many times to accept something they hadn't agreed to. He said it without cruelty, with accuracy. And Lily stopped, which she does. And I went over. And then I couldn't stop thinking about you either. So, she said. So here we are. The tree blazed in front of them. The crowd moved and settled and moved again. Somewhere behind them, the saxophone player hit a phrase cleanly, and someone nearby clapped. Lily turned from the barrier. She had the sketchbook open, pencil out. She looked at both of them with the assessment of a person who has made a conclusion. You're better than last Christmas, she said to Ava. Yes, Ava said. Last Christmas, you were sad. I know. You're not sad now. No. Lily considered this. Good, she said, with the same finality she gave to orange scarves and correct pencil numbers, and the importance of strategic notebooks. Then she looked at the tree, held up her sketchbook, and began. There is a thing that people say about recovery, about any kind of recovery, from any kind of loss, which is that it happens in stages, and that the stages are predictable, and that eventually there is an arrival, a place you reach where the work is done and the life resumes. This is not true, and Ava Collins knew it by the time she stood in Rockefeller Plaza on Christmas Eve with hot chocolate going cold in her hands, and the 60 feet of lit Norway spruce reflected in ice below her, and a man beside her, and a child drawing lines on a page with the patience of someone who understood that the complicated things were worth doing slowly. The work was not done. The work did not finish. What happened instead was that you got better at it, at carrying the weight of the things that didn't resolve, at making space for the uncertainty without letting it make all your decisions, at being present in a life that was imperfect and continuing and genuinely, without qualification, yours. She had spent 2 years being managed, and she had let it happen, and then she had stopped letting it happen, and neither of those facts erased the other. She was a woman who had built something remarkable and lost the ability to run it, and she was a woman who was building something new that was smaller and harder to name but entirely her own. And both of those women were the same woman. She had learned to stand for 11 seconds in October, and she would learn more, and there would be setbacks, and the setbacks would not be the end of the story. Her parents were her parents, better and worse, easier and harder, capable of genuine apology, and also capable still of arriving with flowers she hadn't asked for. She would navigate that for the rest of her life, the way most people navigated family, with effort and care, and the ongoing decision to stay in contact with the people you came from, even when the contact was difficult, because the alternative was a kind of isolation that had its own costs. Ethan Walker was a man who had carried loss with such steadiness that he'd nearly convinced himself he no longer needed the things loss had taken from him. And he was wrong about that, and he knew it now. And the knowing was uncomfortable, and also necessary, and also she could see it in him, the jaw fully at rest, the eyes doing what they did when he was looking at something he'd decided to let matter. A relief. And Lily Walker would keep drawing trees and keep notebooks and keep naming what she saw without softening it, and keep being 8 years old in the way that 8 years old becomes 9 and then 12 and then 23, changing and not, the essential thing underneath it remaining, the patience, the precision, the complete and uncomplicated decision to pay attention. Ava looked at the tree. She had sat here a year ago and felt invisible. She had held the candy cane in her gloved hand on the way home, and done not crying and not explaining in the back of a town car. And the small tree's lights had been the first warm thing in the apartment, and she had not taken them down because she had not been ready to. The small tree was still on the console table at home. It would always be, she thought, not as a symbol, just as a fact. A small artificial tree with a star that needed batteries she kept forgetting to replace, in an apartment that was hers, in a city that was hers, in a life that she had not fixed but had reclaimed. She looked at Ethan. He looked at her. No words. He reached over and took the thermos cup from her hand. It had gone cold, and replaced it with his own, which was still warm, and said nothing about it. She wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Lily was drawing. The crowd was moving. The tree was doing what the tree did. Ava Collins smiled. Not a managed smile. Not the one for photographs or board meetings or the careful social performances of a life built on being seen in a specific way. The small, real kind. The kind that happened to a face rather than being produced by one. For the first time in longer than she could accurately calculate, she was not performing being fine. She was just here, in the cold, with the lights, with the people she had found by the specific combination of chance and choice and the decision, made over and over in small increments on ordinary days, to keep moving toward the room instead of away from it. That was all. That was enough. That was, as it turned out, the whole thing. The tree blazed on. The city held them. The night came down complete and cold and full of ordinary life, which was the only kind there was, and which was, she knew now, she really knew, more than enough to live in.